Right now, even I hear people saying, let us not borrow anymore. You are cheating yourself. You are cheating yourself. Any government which comes into power today must borrow. For two reasons. Number one, COVID pandemic has hit the whole world. The whole world is borrowing, including America. What of Kenya? You cannot cheat yourself and cheat the public that you are not going to borrow. Where will you get money? Right now, the development budget is only 370 billion shillings. Mr. Speaker, another reason why we must borrow, you cannot start a road in my place, which is 70 kilometers. Only 20 kilometers has been done, and you are telling me you can now not borrow money to complete it. Then why did you start that road? How will you pay back the money you have borrowed to do the 20 kilometers? We must borrow as a country. We must raise the debt ceiling as a country. Let us not cheat ourselves. And we must borrow more money. All these things you are saying out there in the politics, it's pure politics. You are wasting Kenyans' time. Kenya must borrow. The only thing we must ask ourselves, where are we borrowing, at what rate, and to do what? Those are the three questions we need to ask. We have made mistakes before. Don't make it again. Borrow money from where it should be borrowed, at concessionary rates, and borrow reasonably, and apply it prudently. Those are the things we need to ask. But cheating Kenyans out there, and you are an economist, and you stand before cameras to tell Kenyans you will not borrow. Who are these fools you are cheating? You cannot cheat Kenyans. Kenyans must borrow. The only thing is to ask how much, and for what, and at what rate. And you will agree with me, I'm not going to be in Parliament from August of this year, but those MPs who will be here will bear me witness that what I said today, and it should remain on record, Kenya is going to borrow. Whether we bring an angel to become the president of this country, that president must borrow. We only need a responsible leader who will borrow prudently and apply the funds prudently, and will stop theft in this country. That is where we are dying. Theft is killing us. A lot of money we borrow is stolen. And the stealing has permeated all facets of the economy and all sectors and arms of government. Executive people are stealing, and the theft is not stopping. We thought it would stop. It is not stopping. You still hear of KEMSA scandals, billionaires, and you wonder why these people can't be arrested. These thieves must be arrested. That today thieves, and yesterday thieves, and even tomorrow thieves must be arrested. DCI, please, and EACC, do your work. Arrest people who are stealing public funds. These are the people who are putting us into problems. Anybody stealing, please, let them be arrested. I think that is what is going, and we need a leader who is committed to fighting corruption. You cannot campaign throughout for 5 years and you cannot even mention corruption in your speech. And then you expect leaders, and we know that our biggest problem as a nation has been caused by corruption. And you want to convince me to vote for you? I am scared. I am afraid. I don't want such a president. Please, God, forgive me. Save Kenya. Not to have a president who does not care about corruption. We need a president who will say corruption is bad and we must stop it. Mr. Speaker, with those many remarks, I would have said so much. But I want to stop there because I know my colleagues would also want to talk, including those who have caused this problem. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Mbadi, today you have spoken to my heart. We need to say these things, and that we must manage our debt. We must manage our debt in an orderly way, and no, you are not going to add. One day you've just walked in, just relax. You cannot add to what the Honorable Mbadi has said. The Honorable Mbadi has spoken. And I think we need to manage our debt well in this country. And that is the message that I have got that he has spoken to me. The Honorable Wahungu Wamalu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first I want to congratulate Honorable Sakwa Bunyasi for coming up with this bill. Mr. Speaker, as we move forward, one of the rules in this House, Mr. Speaker, before a bill comes to the second reading, we must have a committee report. Mr. Speaker, there's no committee report up to now. And the committee report is supposed to have been done by the Committee of Finance. So the question you're asking, Mr. Speaker, we cannot put rules in place and we break our rules. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, as we move forward, this bill, Mr. Speaker, has overstayed on the shelves. And Mr. Speaker, why this bill is coming in place is we did not have full disclosure, Mr. Speaker, as far as the loans are concerned. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we are supporting this bill, that there must be an establishment.
The Honorable Chris Wamalwa, I think you need to correct the record. The report was shared. There's a report on this.
The report, when was it shared? Today, when I was in the table office, Mr. Speaker, I was told the report is not yet there.
No, the
and
record,
I've been looking for that report.
The record
if
shows.
it is there, then it's good. But it's important for me to have pointed out, because this bill was moved last, before the report was shared. So next time, the relevant bodies in this parliament, Mr. Speaker, they must share the report timely. Mr. Speaker, as I move forward, can you protect, Mr. Speaker, the consultations at high level, Mr. Speaker, should be at low level so that we can allow people to debate.
Members, the Honorable Ahungu desires to be heard as he should be. Kindly let us lower the consultation.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, as I move forward, I want to quote two professors from Harvard School. This is Professor Kaplan and Professor Norton, who developed the balanced scorecard model. And this is what they said, Mr. Speaker, that you cannot manage what you can't measure. And today in this country, Mr. Speaker, we don't have accurate records showing how much has the country borrowed up to date. Mr. Speaker, as we speak right now in 2019, there was a motion on the floor of this House where members were being convinced, Mr. Speaker, that we should increase the debt ceiling to 9 trillion. And Mr. Speaker, the reason was like this. We were to get the concessional loans, Mr. Speaker, because concessional loans normally you pay back at a longer period, and when it comes to the interest rate, Mr. Speaker, it is somehow insignificant. And the objective of these concessional loans, Mr. Speaker, was to restructure the commercial loans that the government had borrowed. Mr. Speaker, up to now, we've never been told whether the rescheduling of these loans was done or not. But from the performance, Mr. Speaker, it shows clearly, Mr. Speaker, there's loud consultation, Mr. Speaker. I can hardly speak. Mr. Speaker, I need your protection.
Honorable members, the elder of the House, the Honorable Chris can't breathe.
Absolutely. And the chair of PAC should listen to this, Mr. Speaker. Because when we increased the ceiling to 9 trillion, the critical objective was to get the concessional loans, which are paid back at a longer period and a lower rate, so that they restructure the commercial expensive loans. The question you're asking, and the body should be answering this because it's part of the budget committee, whether the restructuring of these commercial loans was done or not. Because we've never gotten any report. At that time, Mr. Speaker, we need a thorough follow-up, because that was the critical objective why we increased the ceiling to 9 trillion. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of this body that Honorable Sakwa Bunyasi is trying to put across, one of the critical functions we've read, Mr. Speaker, it is supposed to maintain a register of all loans that are advanced to the national government, the county government, and their entities, including the guaranteed by the national government. It is important because, Mr. Speaker, some times back, I had raised a question on the floor of this House to be told how much loans are we owing. We've not had the correct figures. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we've had people talking of 8.2 trillion, others talking of 9 trillion, others talking of 11 trillion. And it will add value, Mr. Speaker, if this bill passes, because it will be a one-stop shop, Mr. Speaker, whereby anybody will be able to know. When you read Article 35 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, it's clear. It says Kenyans have a right to information. If members of parliament, even those on the budget committee, up to now, we don't even know which one is the correct figure, Mr. Speaker. But if anything to go by, if we go by 8.2 trillion, of what the budget committee has put in place. Is it good enough, Mr. Speaker? When we increased the ceiling in 2019 to 9 trillion, it is supposed to have gone up to 2024 in June. But if by now in 2021 we've already gone 95%, Mr. Speaker, on a pro rata basis, it shows we're not doing pretty well. It is true, Mr. Speaker, governments must be borrow, but they must borrow wisely. And as you borrow wisely, Mr. Speaker, you must bring programs that are going to add value. Programs, Mr. Speaker, that are going to be development in nature. If we are going to borrow, Mr. Speaker, and as Honorable Badi puts it, you are going to hire people of NYS to go and clean Kibera streets. That is wrong. Because the money we borrow, Mr. Speaker, it should be focused on infrastructure, things to do with the development. At the moment, Mr. Speaker, the rule of thumb internationally, when you want to look at the borrowing and the GDP, that is the ratio that is being used. When President Moi left power, Mr. Speaker, Kenya had borrowed around 650 billion or so. When Mwai Kibaki left power, he had left the debt ceiling. At that time, we had borrowed up to around 1.8 trillion. But look now the way Jubilee government has borrowed, Mr. Speaker. It has gone on a spending spree, Mr. Speaker. And the rule of thumb, as it says, the ratio of the GDP, when Mwai Kibaki left government, the ratio of borrowing to the GDP was around, and the international standard, Mr. Speaker, in the developing economies, the rule of thumb is it should be around 50% in the economies that are developing. We cannot compare ourselves to the United States of America, or you compare ourselves to Japan, where borrowing is in excess of 100%. Mr. Speaker, we are not a developed economy. As we speak right now, the Jubilee government, when you look at the ratio of public debt and the GDP, it's already 100%, Mr. Speaker. This is something that you must be examined, so that when we borrow, the borrowing must be focused towards programs of development in nature. And Honorable Makali mentioned it. How has the distribution been done in terms of these programs? They are skewed. And when we borrow, Mr. Speaker, the burden goes to the common mwananchi. I remember the slogan at that time, during Mwai Kibaki's time, that kulipa ushuru ni kujitegemea. As we borrow, it is the common mwananchi who is going to pay in terms of taxes and levies. When you look at the cost of fuel right now, Mr. Speaker, as we speak, right now, 60% of the cost of fuel is attributed to the tax and levies. Why has this been increased? Because of the obligation, Mr. Speaker, the country has to meet when it comes to the issues of paying the debt. So as we move forward, Mr. Speaker, we are not saying borrowing should not be done, but let's borrow based on our capacity. Let's not borrow as if we are in the United States, Mr. Speaker, or as if it's in Japan. This is why it is wrong, Mr. Speaker. And as we move forward, Mr. Speaker, reports have been tabled in this parliament, Mr. Speaker, showing 30% of the GDP goes into wastage through corruption, Mr. Speaker. We have agencies that fight corruption. And when you look at the level of wastages, Mr. Speaker, particularly post-handshake, when Honorable Badi talks about the issue of KEMSA billionaires, the KEMSA billionaires, Mr. Speaker, it is coming as a result of the post-handshake. And the people who have been mentioned, Mr. Speaker, widely on these KEMSA billionaires, they are affiliated on the handshake, Mr. Speaker. So the truth of the matter is this. Let's look at this matter and handle it objectively, Mr. Speaker. This is a matter that must be looked effectively. My friend here was talking Luoland, the other side. Now he's just jumped here. He doesn't even know what I said, Mr. Speaker. Maybe he's one of the beneficiaries of KEMSA billionaires. Somebody who is corrupt is corrupt. And Mr. Speaker,
the Honorable Chris Wamalwa, now you have attracted the point of order that Wandai wishes. It is now a proper point of order. The Honorable Wandai,
Mr. Speaker, is it in order for the Honorable Chris Wamalwa to refer derogatively to the Luo nation in the manner he has done
the Honorable
on
Chris
the floor of the
Wamalwa,
National
just
Assembly?
withdraw that, please.
Can he withdraw and apologize to the great people of the Luo community?
Just withdraw that.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize, but I never say that. He was speaking to my friend, Honorable the MP for Bondo. He was speaking Luo. That's what I said. They were speaking Luo. I never said the Luo nation, Mr. Speaker. And every language is allowed in this house, Mr. Speaker.
You have apologized, you cannot...
So I've withdrawn the statement, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. So on the way forward, Mr. Speaker, the government that comes in 2022 is only God who knows who will be forming the next government. The budget policy statement, Mr. Speaker, it is supposed to give priority areas as far as expenditure is concerned. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, for us to increase the bracket of paying taxes, Mr. Speaker, that's why we are focusing on the bottom-up economic model, Mr. Speaker. And we do support what Honorable Musalia Mudavadi mentioned, him himself as an economist, Mr. Speaker. It was important for us to put in place, because this BPS, Mr. Speaker, up to now, it was withdrawn from the order paper. Up to now, we don't understand why.
The Honorable Chris, your time has run. The Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, member for Kiharu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. And I want to support Honorable Sakwa Bunyasi on the transparency in far as borrowing and public debt is concerned. And Mr. Speaker, my thought is that we should actually elevate the authority into a commission, because we need a standalone institution that is totally independent. And I say so because, Mr. Speaker, our country is currently indebted in a way that is unsustainable. Mr. Speaker, comparatively, our nation, our African peers, and even beyond Africa, our economy and our country is in red. We have also seen commentaries across the world in terms of the indebtedness of our nation. And therefore, this is a matter that is out there, and Mr. Speaker, it pinches more to us as Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, we have actually borrowed beyond the legal limits as a country. This House has set a limit of 9 trillion Kenya shillings insofar as the domestic and the foreign debt combined is concerned. And Mr. Speaker, it was very embarrassing sitting here and listening to pedestrian arguments from some of the people who actually hold even positions of leadership in this House, who, Mr. Speaker, clearly do not know the condition of the debt in this country, have no correct figures, and therefore they do not even understand the role on which they hold in terms of leading this House. Mr. Speaker, the current debt in this country is a whopping 11.7 trillion Kenya shillings. And Mr. Speaker, therefore, that is even beyond what we have said here in Parliament. I say so because when you see at the data and look at the data as reported by the Central Bank of Kenya, it is in excess of 8.4 trillion, Mr. Speaker. But the debts that are guaranteed to SOEs, that is the state-owned enterprises, parastatals, and other government agencies, Mr. Speaker, they exceed 3.4 trillion. And Mr. Speaker, in the economic terms, in the economic angle, there is no other way to treat those debts other than loading them over to be part of the national public debt. Mr. Speaker, just last year, our country was actually forced by the IMF to be clear in terms of the actual debt in this country. And by around that time, Mr. Speaker, that is when we actually realized that our debt has not been including a very serious component, that is the guarantee by GOK to SOEs and other parastatals. Mr. Speaker, how do you treat a debt, for example, that is owed by a water company, let's say in Rwanda, in Busia, in Murang'a, in Mombasa? These water companies are government entities, and any debt they borrow, Mr. Speaker, the guarantor is the government of Kenya. In the event, and in the many events that they do not, are not able to pay, Mr. Speaker, that debt is loaded over to be part of the national debt. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, our current debt is actually over 110% debt to GDP ratio. That is in excess massively of the over 70-something% that is reported here by the Treasury, Mr. Speaker, which is an actual lie. Mr. Speaker, a Kenyan citizen, even a child born today, is indebted to a tune of 255,000, what is called debt per capita. Every Kenyan, Mr. Speaker, is indebted, let me repeat, to a tune of 255,000. When President Kibaki retired, Mr. Speaker, that debt per capita was just around 48,000 per every Kenyan. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we can see the trajectory. Let me give the actual statistics because I had some other pedestrian ones. And Mr. Speaker, Anyone can go to the CBK website. You can find out that when President Kibaki retired, the debt load in this country, the debt portfolio, the combined domestic and foreign, was around 1.8 trillion. By the time we are wrapping up the 2017 calendar year, it was just around 4.5 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, the net borrowing in the first year of this regime was just around 2.7 trillion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, from the handshake time, and these are the facts, from 2018 to date, that debt has accumulated to 11.7 trillion. And therefore, the net debt in the handshake era is actually 7.2 trillion Kenya shillings. Mr. Speaker, what you are asking, where is this money? We can see it, we cannot trace it. I also heard some other people, Mr. Speaker, in this house, referencing other economies like Japan. And I want to respond with the real Japan. Mr. Speaker, I agree with those who are bringing or entertaining the arguments that countries borrow. And they said Japan. Actually, the actual Japan debt to GDP ratio is around 237%, which I agree is beyond the 100% of Kenya. But Mr. Speaker, that is so pedestrian, because there are issues that we must look at very closely when we are talking about the issue of public debt. Number one is cost. Japan, Mr. Speaker, Japanese government is paid to borrow. What do I mean? The 10-year yield of a Japanese board, Mr. Speaker, board, is actually negative earning, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, the government of Japan is actually paid to borrow. The same equivalent, the 10-year board of the government of Kenya, is in excess of 13%. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, there is actually nothing to compare. Number two, there is something called Forex. Most of our debt that is foreign is dollar denominated. Mr. Speaker, our country has got over 5 trillion of foreign debt. Anytime there is a variation of only 1% of dollar to Kenya shilling, Mr. Speaker, our debt portfolio increases by over 50 billion. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we cannot compare Kenya and Japan or even with the US. But more importantly, there is something called net borrowing. When we talk about national public debt, we actually take the figure of the monies that the government has borrowed. In retrospect, Mr. Speaker, our country, Kenya, lets to no one. We only borrow. And I'm actually using the same site of Japan. The Japanese government, yes, they have borrowed in excess of 237%. But, Mr. Speaker, they have lent more money outside than they have borrowed. Actually, Japan is the highest net lender to the US government. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, the Japanese government actually makes money in borrowing to lend. And therefore, there is no comparison also there. Mr. Speaker, let me give you a citation of how much our country has borrowed and how much a proportion can actually do to the livelihood of the Kenyan people. The 7.2 trillion is borrowed by this regime from the handshake era. Mr. Speaker, just half of that, just around 3.56 trillion, can do the following. And I want the Kenyan people to listen carefully. The president always talks about the 10,000 kilometers of road tarmacked by this regime. If we actually double the 10,000 kilometers to 20,000 kilometers at a rate of 60 million, when we have even put in a cut for the brokers, 60 million per kilometer, that's around 1.2 trillion Mr. households. When President Kibaki retired, 2 million of those had connection to electricity. Mr. Speaker, connecting the 10,000 remaining to electricity without even the government subsidy, and therefore we put it at 35,000, that is 350 billion, Mr. Speaker. If you are to connect the other 10,000 households to safe drinking water at 10 million households, Mr. Speaker, at 50,000 per household, that is around 500 billion, Mr. Speaker. If we are to build a level 5 hospital in every constituency in Kenya, that is 290 billion. Forget about the Tibet, Mr. Speaker. If we are to build a university of 1 billion Kenya shillings, if we add on even the SGR, Mr. Speaker, of 350 billion, that comes to below 3.5 trillion, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, what this borrowing has been perpetuating is something called development corruption. This government, led by those people in the highest offices, have captured our economy. Let me cite, for example, this expressway here. During President Kibaki's era, this expressway was to cost just around 25 billion. Currently, it's costing in excess of 80 billion, Mr. Speaker. Where is this money going? To pockets of some people. Let me also cite the SGR. We spent over 400 billion Kenyan taxpayers' money.
The Honorable Sotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity also to raise my voice on this very important bill. First of all, I'll start by thanking Honorable Bunyasi for bringing this very timely and very important bill to this House. Mr. Speaker, most of the people who have spoken here, most of the members who have spoken, they have digressed into political issues. But if I may go to the substance of the bill, Mr. Speaker, having read the report, I would say we have adequate legal safeguards on matters of debt management in this country. There are some functions that are performed by CBK. There is also a debt management department in the Treasury. But this bill will basically enhance the level of management of debt management in this country. This bill contains very, very useful provisions, but there are some gaps which the stakeholders have done justice to this bill. Going through the report, you will get an impression that various stakeholders, including Treasury, CBK, and others, Capital Market Authority, they have presented very, very useful suggestions which the committee has adopted. And I think that will further improve the bill in substance. There are a few contradictions in the bill, Mr. Speaker, which may interfere with the roles of CBK, Treasury, and other institutions like Unclaimed Asset Authority. But I think those issues have been raised up in the report, and they will do panel beating to ensure that the functions of the authority do not interfere with the constitutional functions of those offices. Mr. Speaker, there is only one thing that I thought the bill did not focus on, and that is the issue of public debt in relation to the fiscal policy. Because you cannot talk about the public debt without talking about the fiscal processes. How is that going to be done? Because I think one of the solutions to the issue of public debt is to put more sustained action around fiscal policy so that you generate more revenue, so that there is no need to borrow. Mr. Speaker, I've had some raise the issue of borrowing. I think borrowing is a good thing. And I think no one in this world, whether you are a successful businessman or you are a private individual, can succeed without borrowing. You will have to borrow. You will have to borrow so that you can grow. Including my friend Sankok there. He has to borrow to survive. So borrowing is good, but how you utilize the funds, it's very important. And I think this is the gist of the matter here. And this is why this bill is focused on how the money borrowed is going to be utilized. If you look at the statistics of other countries, you realize that their debt to GDP is higher than Kenya. For example, if you look at the African context, Kenya is at about 65.6. Seychelles is 94%. Ghana is 78. Morocco is 76. Tunisia is 87.
Just hold on, the Honorable. So the Honorable Sankok, I heard you say that you have never borrowed. If you have never borrowed, I want to let you know that you are one of the lucky few in the world who have no debt. And we wish you well, and we wish you to continue in that way. So that is, you are fortunate. You are fortunate. Just
Mr. Speaker,
so proceed, the Honorable Sots.
You know, he's trying to eat into my time. So what I'm trying to say, other countries have higher debt to GDP ratios. South Africa, which is a bigger economy, is doing 80 debt to GDP. And as that has been said, even US is 128, Venezuela 350, Brazil 89. So what is important here is not the borrowing, is how do you utilize the money you borrowed. And I think that's where our focus should be, that we need to ensure prudent borrowing and prudent utilization of the funds borrowed. Now, Mr. Speaker, coming to the issues members have raised, is the issue, where did the rain start beating us? Mr. Speaker, I am happy that those who have caused this problem are the ones who are talking louder on the issue of public debt. We know when this side, led by our leader, was talking about Eurobond, they were quiet. When this side, through our leader, was talking about SGR, and SGR, Mr. Speaker, the amount of money spent on SGR could build this country 17 similar SGRs. It could build 154 superhighways. So the Jubilee government, especially in the first term, should tell us how this money was utilized. Eurobond, the country borrowed up to 780 billion shillings on Eurobond. When we raised this matter, our colleagues on the other side, who are now preachers of debt problem, were quiet. And again, Mr. Speaker, we must ask ourselves, where did it start beating us? In the 90s, there is something that IMF and World Bank introduced in this country called the structural adjustment programs, which led into conditional loaning by IMF. This is where the problem started. And we know who are in the Ministry of Finance that time. We know the people who introduced this. They are the ones who are talking loud about public debt. The structural adjustment programs led to layoffs in civil service. It led to removal of subsidies. We are talking about high fertilizer prices. Where did it start? It also led to lack of independency in the management of economic policy in this country, because economic policy in this country is donor-driven. So when you talk about debt problem, and you want to make that debt problem be the handshake problem, we are telling you, please do not open the can of worms. Because we have enough information to throw it back at you, that the problems of this country started with the structural adjustment programs with the people who are on the other side, trying to become preachers of good economic practices. So, Mr. Speaker, and we have seen scandals. Some of the money that has been borrowed has been used badly through scandals. Goldenberg, Kimwarel Dump, Eurobond, and many others. So we would like to have an explanation before you start talking about public debt and how you want to lower food prices. We want to ask you to address these issues of where did the rain start beating us. It started beating us through corruption, and we know the corruption that is there. It started beating us with the structural adjustment programs that were punitive to the people of Kenya. But all that said and done, Mr. Speaker, this is a good bill. The amendments are good, and I think it will add a lot of value to this country in terms of public debt management. For those few remarks, I support.
The Honorable Ntoimaga Musa, member for Samburu North, is not in the House. The next on the list is the Honorable Nyika Luambura, member for Seme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, debt management is a serious issue in the financial and economic management of a country. Sure, as everybody has said, no country, no company will grow without taking debts. But the issue is how the debt is managed. It's right from the time of borrowing the debts, for what is it being borrowed? How is it going to be used? What are the risks that are associated with that particular debt? It is there where we have a problem. We are mentioning many instances in this country, the SGR, the Eurobond, the dams. All these are actually just showing that we actually need a way of managing our debts. The SGR, for example, leave alone the high cost of it. First of all, the feasibility that was done indicated that it was going to run all the way from Mombasa to Uganda, passing through Kisumu and Eldoret. Now, if you have a feasibility and then you actually don't implement the project according to the feasibility, you do it halfway, you do not expect it to give returns because the facts are not being properly used. And I said here earlier, Mr. Speaker, that when we have an issue of national importance on which we all agree should be addressed, every time we try to bring in politics, we know when politics comes, logic flies out of the window. I think we should train ourselves to leave out politics, because in this situation, nobody will say they're actually free from it. If you look at when SGR started, when the Eurobond, I remember when the Eurobond came, we were actually in very serious opposition. I myself actually was in record as talking against Eurobond and how the money was to be used. There was no handshake then. So my summary is, do not bring politics when we are discussing national issue where there's actually an agreement that we need to save our country. Right now, Mr. Speaker, the country is at a crisis in relation to debts. And I think it is again the same issue. How have we used the debt? How have we looked at the debt in context of our own economy? We are saying the ratio of debt to GDP, we are quoting different countries, but we know that for a country like ours, the ratio should be 55%. We are at about 70. Now, we then don't have to compare it with other countries because their level of growth is different, their ratio is different. So we are obviously above what would be expected for us. When we talk of the ceiling that we did, again, I remember I was in this parliament, we were doing the ceiling, we brought it to 9 trillion. There were a lot of issues that were raised and what should be done and measures that should be taken to ensure that the debt is properly managed. That is when we actually raised the ceiling. Now, our debt is about 8.2 trillion, we are saying, but people are using different definitions, it's going to 11. Again, Mr. Speaker, that then calls for a proper system of managing it where our data is agreed on. The definition of a debt is agreed on. You don't bring in guaranteed debts if that is not in the definition. So, Mr. Speaker, I therefore think that this bill has come at a very appropriate time. Mr. Speaker, the concern is so much that for the first time, for as long as I can remember, the Budget and Appropriation Committee has brought in a report, a separate report on debt management, something that has never happened before. So we're really realizing as a country that this is something we need to manage. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill. It has come at the right time, and it has the structures that we need. If you look at the structure, we have structured it as an authority and with functions. I've noticed, Mr. Speaker, I've gone through it. It's actually a very broad function. It is a service authority. To some extent, it's also a management authority. and also it is a regulating authority. So it is have all these functions. But I'm sure that as we implement it over a period of time, if we apply logic and leave out politics, then we will find out how to harmonize all this so that it does what we all want. If we continue with this kind of blame game in politics, all these structures we are putting in place in this house will not serve this country. They will actually be badly structured. They will not be properly implemented because politics will even interfere with implementation. I think when we are out there campaigning for opposition, that's okay. We can say anything. But when we come to this house, I think we should confine ourselves to the facts and the figures and the data that will bring good results to the people of this country. Structures like this are not discriminatory as to your political persuasion. If they affect the cost of living, everybody suffers. So I think this is a bill that has come at the right time, and I really, really congratulate Honorable Bunyasi for bringing this. I like the structure that he has put in place. The membership actually is appropriate. If you look at the people that we need or the offices that we need, they're all there. The only thing I've noted, Mr. Speaker, this bill actually also affects the counties, and yet in the membership we have actually not included representation from the county. I've discussed that with the mover, and I think that is something we can bring in an amendment so that we get somebody representing the Council of Governors. Because if you look at Clause 12, Mr. Speaker, you will find that this bill gives the authority for the counties to seek support, get support for managing their debts. They can have debts, but we know a lot of the problems we blame the governors on are actually structural problems, capacity problems that the counties need support for, not blame. And therefore, if this bill comes in with that recognition that the counties will need that support so that they can manage their debts, I think it's a good start. Mr. Speaker, this bill also in Clause 18 creates the position of a registrar of loans. So that register, again here we were arguing, what are the loans we have in the country? When this house and people who are able to search have different sources of information and therefore are not clear that the amount of loans, who has them, what they have done, that is exactly when we need to have registrar so that it is authoritative and it is the only source we quote, so that people don't quote Google data, because that may not be relevant for our situation. Mr. Speaker, I also support this bill because it gives a very clear relationship between the national government and the county governments. And it brought out something that was here yesterday when we were discussing another bill. It is very clear when it is talking of the national government, it is talking to the cabinet secretary. And when it is talking of the county, I think that is in clause, in part 5, in clause 9. The role of the cabinet secretary as representing the national government. And then when it is dealing with the county government, it's very clear they are talking of the CEC at the county who is responsible for financial policy at the country. Again, that is part 4 in clause 44. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a bill that will help us. But what I've realized, the powers it has and the control it will have to put over us, managers, the powerful managers in treasuries and even in central bank, is such that if it is not protected, the authority may actually be fought a lot. But we need it. And if need be, we look at the amendments and see where we can give it the support so that it has the authority and the security it needs to implement what we need. We must borrow, but we must manage the debt to give us the results we need, instead of burdening our children and our grandchildren with loans that did not serve and will not serve them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, the Honorable Nyikal. We are the people on the stage now. The world gives you only 15 minutes to dance, and this is the time for this parliament to dance. So it is our duty to do what we must do rightly for our country. Well spoken. The Honorable Duale, member for Garissa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Township.
Mr. Speaker, today I'm a happy man because Honorable Bunyasi bill is on the floor since last week. And for those who don't know Honorable Bunyasi, and looking at his bill, Honorable Bunyasi worked with the World Bank at a very senior level before joining politics. So he knows what he's doing and he knows what public debt is. Mr. Speaker, this debate on public debt, whichever side of the political divide you will be, you must discuss it. It is the right time. This baby will be discussed in the next 6 months. For those who, because they are on the wrong side of history, because of the handshake, and they want to defend it, I want to tell them that President Uhuru Kenyatta is not a candidate. Honorable Raila Odinga is a candidate. So you must choose. It's going to be a very integral part of the discourse to the general election, because public debt affects each and every Kenyan in the villages that who we represent in this house. And Mr. Speaker, what are we saying? And I want to go on record, and I want to challenge our friends. Let us not discuss this thing in a very... Mr. Speaker has violated Article 211 of the Constitution and the PFM Act, Section 50, subsection 2A of that law of 2012. Why do I say so, Mr. Speaker? Yes, I agree, and I'm happy. I don't know why they are not allowing this House to discuss. The Budget Committee tabled the budget policy statement, which is the fiscal framework in preparing the national budget, both for the national government, which they have given 2.2 trillion, which they have given 390 billion to the counties. They have given 38 billion to Parliament, and they have given 18.8 billion to the judiciary. Mr. Speaker, this House must be cognizant how much did they allocated to the consolidated fund services. In servicing debts, they have allocated 967 billion, close to 1 trillion. In a budget of 3.3 trillion, 1 trillion is going to service debts. Mr. Speaker, whoever will form government, and let me go on record, whether it is the Azimio team, which is very unlikely, or the Kenya Kwanza team, or the Oka, which is far unlikely, if they don't fix this economy within the first 18 months, including ourselves, Kenya Kwanza, this economy will collapse and it will go the Greece way. So we must discuss it. Whether you're in Azimio, whether you are in Kenya Kwanza, whether you are in the, if you are not the two horses, whether you are the donkey and you are Oka, you must discuss it. Because in 6 months, President Uhuru Kenyatta will hand over to you an economy that cannot last in your hands for 12 to 18 months. Mr. Speaker, it is not about whether Aden Duale was the leader of majority, whether Ichungwa was the chair of budget. And I want members to read the Hansard. The budget committee of this House since 2013 have been recommending to the National Treasury that the debt level in our country is untenable and we must restructure debt. Mr. Speaker, let's speak. There are 4 categories of debts or where we borrow from. There is a multilateral, the World Bank, IMF, ADB, AFP. There is the bilateral, led by China. We have the commercial, domestic, the commercial banks, and we have the international sovereign bond. These are the 4 areas. But Mr. Speaker, today 77% of our debt from the bilateral is from China. Why did this administration, particularly in its second term from 2018, why did they borrow more from China, Mr. Speaker? It's because of corruption. It's because Chinese were giving 10%. It's because China, Mr. Speaker, in Africa, is giving and taking back the money. They are bringing their own parastatal, their own companies to do the roads. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Dini Nyoro said something. This, you say, express highway. During Kibaki's time, the World Bank refused to fund it because the World Bank, in its estimate, said this express highway can be built within the framework financial resource of 15 billion. Kibaki government and those who sit in that cabinet, including Honorable Raila Odinga, approved and signed the contract for 23 billion. Speaker, the Jubilee administration in its second term raised it to 63 billion. Today, as we sit here, it's going to cost the Kenyan people 84 billion. So, Speaker, more fundamentally, we are told this is a private-public partnership. But if you look at the budget and the appropriation reports of this House, the minister levy certain amount to this road. And I want to ask Kenyans that when this express highway is built, like it happened in Nigeria, one morning Kenya use the toll station, and they should use this express highway for free. It happened in Nigeria. Because how do we pay through the petroleum levy and appropriation of this House, and then we are being told we pay for that toll station? So, Speaker, this express highway is a manifestation of what we call dynasty versus hustlers. You are telling the dynasties to go up because they can pay. And you want the millions of Kenyans hustlers who bought their cars through hire purchase to live in the traffic jam for them to reach home. This is a clear manifestation of dynasty versus hustler. Let me come to this debt issue. Mr. Speaker, I want my colleagues to challenge me on records. Kenya borrowed 7 billion, over 7 trillion during the period of the handshake between 2018 to 2019, when there was no cabinet that took place because the presence of William Ruto was making some people have constipation. Mr. Speaker, cabinet did not approve. And Mr. Speaker, we will challenge this House. I was a former majority leader. All those bills that were brought to this House without a cabinet memo, Mr. Speaker, within the reading of the Constitution are illegal. There was no cabinet that set the last 1.5 years. And then we are being told we are discussing government bills in this House, including the budget policy statement. Mr. Speaker, President Moi left at 650 billion. And people should not glorify Moi. People borrow in tandem with the growth of the economy. So 650 Moi, he couldn't borrow more than that. In fact, he left at 2002, the late Moi. It's good he left. If Kibaki did not come in, if Moi's preferred candidate could have come in and the extension of Moi regime could have continued, Kenya could have collapsed, Mr. Speaker. But when President Kibaki took over and he fixed the economy, and the leaders who will come after August 9, they must know that whether it is William Ruto, Musalia Mudavadi, Raila Odinga, Kalonzo Musyoka, you are being handed over an economy that is bleeding. And you better have serious advisors and economists to sit behind you in the next 6 months to give you a focus of how you'll fix this economy. It's a reality. I am a Kenyan. Mr. Speaker, Kibaki left, in fact, by June 2013, President Kibaki left at 2.1 trillion. The first term of President Uhuru, he borrowed close to 2.7 trillion. That is visible. We built many roads, including my own constituency, Garissa Modogash, 140 kilometers. We improved the infrastructure of the Kenya Port Authority, the Kenya Airport Authority. We invested in geothermal and energy. Mr. Speaker, finally, this 8.3, the minister is not telling us how much commitments, 3.7 trillion commitment loans, Honorable Munyasi will tell you, which we are paying for. Speaker, we are at 11.7, and the minister did not come to this House for approval. And we are saying, Ukur Yatani, not today. After this government leaves, you will.
Honorable Dwale, it is good that that last comment is not on record. No, it is not on record. And the Speaker did not hear it. But it just leaves me wondering. I mean, why is everybody fighting to take over this poison chalice? I will give the next chance to the Honorable Nyenze Edith, member for Kitui West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for this opportunity to contribute to this bill. Actually, I note that the main objective of the Public Debt Management Authority Bill 2020 is to establish the Public Debt Management Authority as an independent body to manage the public debt in the country at both levels of government, that is the national government level and also the county level. The country's debt is actually rising at an alarming level, and therefore there is need to manage the same, to protect the current and future generations. And that's why this authority is being created, to try to manage, to try to control, to try to administer the public debt. Debt is not bad, because everyone, for there to be growth, then one has to take some loan and therefore incur some debts. But now the question is how to manage that debt. So the debt level in our country is quite alarming, as I've said, and that is 70% of GDP. And the question is, how is this debt being used? It's good to have a register whereby we would have a record showing after we borrow this amount of money, where does it go? Because where it's being used should be up in projects which will give back to the country, and actually which won't be used to even repay this debt. Because if we just take loans and then without having proper use of them, of the funds, then we are likely to misuse that money through other ways, through corruption, through mismanagement, misappropriation, and therefore when it comes to repayment, it becomes a problem. So it's good to know where the money, have a register where the money will be used. And that will be the work of this authority. And the other thing is that actually we incur debts when the ratio between revenue and expenditure does not balance. When the expenditure is so high, then we incur debts. Central Bank has been in charge of managing our debt, though we have in Treasury a department which deals with debts. But up to now, there is need to have an authority which will be independent, which its core mandate will be to manage, to control the debts. If this authority is not given independence, then we will be doing, we will just be creating it in impunity. It will not do the work which if it's not given independence. It should also be given enough funding to ensure that it carries out its work appropriately. And this is to try to reduce wastage through their management, to try to reduce corruption, to try to ensure that the country only borrows what it can pay back. So, Mr. Speaker, I actually support the authority to be put in place to ensure that there is a proper management of our public debt. But the country should also look at other expenses, especially which go to some parastatals which are always funded, and they do not seem to give back to the community, to do the service they are meant to be doing. So it's good for the country to ensure that enterprises which are depending on the exchequer for survival and are not productive, we should actually do away with them. And also the government should live within its means, because if it lives within its means, then that means we will not have many debts. We will control the debts. So we should only borrow if we have a proper plan on how to repay the debts. And we should also enhance revenue collection so that the ratio between revenue and expenditure is actually reduced. Although I congratulate KRA because they are doing very well in revenue collection, which I hope is not killing the new startups and the small businesses. But I congratulate them since this time their revenue collection is very good. So we should not actually keep on enhancing the revenue collection to ensure that the balance between revenue and expenditure is reduced, and this will mean not taking too much loans. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I support the creation of the new authority. Thank you.
Very well. The Honorable Jungle, member for Thika Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the creation of this authority, and I think there are three things that we need actually to look into this country. And just like any other enterprise, if you do not run a country like an enterprise, then you are doomed to fail. If we don't plan ourselves so that we can be able to run in a way where we are creating money for our country. And there are only 2 or 3 things I really want to say. If you're taking a debt, you must plan for it. You cannot take debt so that you can use it in consumer goods, in importations. If you take debt, part of that debt must be planned for development. If debt does not produce, it means then you cannot be able to pay for that debt. Number 2, when you plan for the debt, you must make sure that leakages are minimal. By leakages, I mean we have seen a lot of impunity in this country. We have seen a lot of stealing of public funds in this country. We have seen a lot of people, a lot of leaders who get into these seats. They don't get here so that they can build the country. They get here so that they can start milking the country. This, as a country, I think it's high time we decide where do we want to be? What kind of a country do we want to have? What kind of an economy do we want to have? And I can tell you what, if we can be able to address only the issue of corruption, this country will be different in a very, very short time. And I can tell you, even today, if you have seen now, the campaigns and the politics at the highest gear, the heat is on. But I've been looking at the parties that really want to take the executive power in this country. None of those parties or coalitions are anywhere saying zero tolerance to corruption. Nowhere anyone says that they're going to protect public funding. So basically, I find it very odd that everybody is going out there saying how they're going to develop this country. How do you develop the country if you do not address the issue of corruption? It is a mirage. It's not going to happen. Now, let me put it this way, and let me say also that the fact that we want to have an authority that oversees the public debt, I see it as a very positive step. Look at a situation where you have a dominant party taking the executive power in this country. Like what is happening in this parliament today. We have parties or coalitions of parties that have got majority power or majority members in this country. So whenever the government, the executive wants to borrow, they just need to whip their members. And the member has no leeway even of any argument. That is why you see debt ceiling is raised arbitrarily. There are no figures. There is no enough information. But nobody, especially people who belong to those dominant parties, they cannot ask questions why they have been whipped. And if they move the wrong way, of course, there are consequences in the party. But the authority is not aligned to any party. So I really welcome this authority because they can be able to make independent decisions. They can be able to ask questions. We can be able to call them in this August House to answer our questions when we have some. So I think this is totally the right direction that we are moving to. And finally, I want to say that when you take debt and you use it in the correct manner, you are likely to go very far. In fact, private companies that are doing very well, they are into a lot of debt, but because of the debt management, they go far. I want to say that, yes, we cannot get away from public debt. We are going to incur public debt, but the most important part is, can we use that public debt efficiently in a way that it works? I also want to encourage the current government that please, you have a lot of projects out there that are not finished. Finish them up so that whichever advantage that we wanted to get, especially the road infrastructure, those roads will only start bringing money when they are finished and completed. Please make sure that all those roads are completed. And even in this one, I want to put one particularly in my constituency, that is in Thika East, a place called Muguga. It goes all the way to Gedima. That road has a lot of benefits to the people of Thika. I ask the current government and the relevant ministry, please put money in that road. Let it get finished. We need to start using it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Kiambu area. The Honorable Kimani Kuria, member for Molo.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the onset, I would like to congratulate the Honorable Sakwa Bunyasi on coming up with this timely bill about debt management. Mr. Speaker, I would like to quote President Herbert Hoover, the 31st President of the United States, who said, "Blessed are the young, for they shall inherit the national debt." That is the sad reality that you're talking about now. That every person born now and in the future inherits a debt that's the responsibility to pay. But many people will ask then, how then do we do development if you're not borrowing? Ronald Reagan, the 40th president of the US, said that we do not have $1 trillion debt because we haven't taxed enough. But you have $1 million debt because we spent too much. And the biggest question, the biggest problem, and the only solution we have as a country is to manage our expenditure. Because as long as we continue to make roadside declarations on projects that are going to be done without due diligence on what is the value and what is the return from that project, we will continue. In economic terms, we call it a physical discipline. Mr. Speaker, according to the Constitution, we have had most members of the executive resign from their offices ahead of them going to seek political office. We have seen several cabinet secretaries, we have seen several principal secretaries and heads of parastatal resign. And Mr. Speaker, I'm almost certain that's going to take a few months before those positions are filled. What does that mean? Does it mean that with the resignation of the Minister for Agriculture, Cicely Kariuki, now there is no programs that are happening at the Ministry of Agriculture? Does it mean with the resignation of the Principal Secretary for Water, for him to go and vie for a political seat, then there are no operations in that particular state department? The answer is no. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, some of the current expenditures we have by the executive are actually not necessary. We have the appointment of CASs, Cabinet Administrative Secretaries. Of course, it comes with a lot of staffing, a lot of budget for those offices. Those offices are not even legal in the Constitution, and therefore did not even exist before. So what these roles that they do, these expenses that they incur, can those expenses be avoided? And therefore, Mr. Speaker, that's why I'm saying that the solution to our debt problem is actually fiscal discipline. We must be disciplined in how we spend Wanjiko's money, in how we spend our taxpayers' money. The Honorable Jango has done a very good contribution about the role of our political parties. When you listen to the debates, now you can tell which political inclination someone stands on how they support or oppose the issue of debt, on whether they approve the government to borrow more or not. And we saw this scenario change when the political inclination was different 1 or 2 years ago. As a parliament, as bestowed to us by Article 211 of the Constitution, about our role in debt management, we should take a responsibility as parliament and actually have a bipartisan approach to this matter. We should forget whether we are Kenya Kwanza or Azimio and tackle this issue of debt as Parliament of the Republic of Kenya, and not because of our political inclination. Because, Mr. Speaker, the decisions that we make for our people is this debt that we are accumulating for our children. It will be paid for all our children, irrespective of whether they are Kenya Kwanza or Azimio Kwanza children, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, I raised on the floor of this House as per our standing orders to seek a statement from the Departmental Committee on Agriculture about fertilizer prices. And, Mr. Speaker, such a priority area when Kenyans are tired about food prices, that question, Mr. Speaker, has not been prioritized even now. I have not received an answer from the Departmental Committee on Agriculture on the solution towards these fertilizer prices. And yet, at the end of the year, we'll cry again that the food prices have gone up. But like in my constituencies, this is the planting season. So if the Ministry of Agriculture has to provide a solution on the fertilizer prices, it has to be now when you are planting. Because if you lower these fertilizer prices in August or in September, then we are still it's not going to be helpful to us. Because by that time it will be too late. We will not have been able to plant enough to feed this country. Mr. Speaker, my constituents, some of my constituents are feeding their cows with cabbages and sukuma wiki. Carrots are being eaten by cows and goats from Molo because we are great farmers. And my farmers cannot understand the issue about food prices because they are growing the food. But the cost of growing this food is too high because especially of the cost of this fertilizer. And if you're going to address this issue, we must look at the issue of these farm inputs, Mr. Speaker. Politicians have spoken about the issue of debt. And they have spoken depending on their political inclination. But, Mr. Speaker, I choose to take a slightly different approach. We have an institution called KIPRA in this country, an institution that is funded by government funds to do research on matters of public and on matters of public policy. And their report last year, they said that although our debt is sustainability is wanting, they pointed out at the key indicators about our debt sustainability that needs to be looked into. Mr. Speaker, the solvency indicators such as the present value of public debt as a percentage of GDP should be at 70%. Mr. Speaker, the present value of external debt as a percentage of our GDP should be at 55%. And as we speak, as the current debt sustainability or these two ratios that measure debt sustainability are way below the threshold. So forget the politicians, Mr. Speaker. Our policy makers are saying this debt sustainability is wanting, that we really need to look at the issue of this debt and look at these indicators and provide a solution. So when I hear some of leadership of this House saying we need to raise the debt ceiling, we need to raise the debt ceiling, are they talking as politicians or are they listening to policy makers in this country? Because that's what they are saying. So as I submit to Mr. Speaker, my request to this August House, this 12th Parliament, is please let us look at this issue of debt in a bipartisan manner. Let us forget which political inclination we follow and let us make a decision that is good for our great country of Kenya. Let us manage this debt. Let us reduce our debt. Let us reduce our spending. Because the only solution to this debt issue, Mr. Speaker, is fiscal discipline. And with that, I submit.
Thank you, Kimani Kuria. Well spoken. The Honorable Tandaza Sawa, member for Matuga.
Kwanza shukrani nyingi kwa Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kunipatia fursa hii niweze kuzungumza juu ya jambo hili muhimu sana ambalo linamuuma mwananchi katika pembe ya jamhuri hii yetu ya Kenya. Nichukue fursa hii pia kumshukuru Mheshimiwa Sakwa Bunyasi ambaye ni mtaalamu wa mambo haya ya madeni na mwanachama wetu wa ANC kuweza kufikiria kwa kitaalamu kuona kwamba umefika wakati ambapo bila watu kama yeye kuweza kuleta miswada kama hii, basi Kenya itaangamia. Na itaangamia kwa sababu tunachukua madeni leo ambayo huenda sio sisi ambao tutalipa madeni haya. Ni madeni ambayo yatalipwa baada ya miaka 20, 30, 10, wengine hatutakuwepo. Inamaanisha basi wale ambao watalipa madeni haya ni vizazi vinavyokuja, ambavyo vizazi hivi tayari vina changamoto ya ajira, ina changamoto ya kwamba hawana pesa mfukoni, wana changamoto za kila aina, ili hali ndio tunatarajia waweze kulipa madeni haya. Na ndio maana mswada huu ni wa muhimu kuweka kiwango maalum kwamba licha ya vile ambavyo atakayekuwa kiongozi atataka kula pesa hizi, kwa sababu ukiangalia pesa nyingi ambazo zimechukuliwa katika madeni, fungu kubwa ni ile ambayo limeingia kwa mifuko ya watu. Huo ndio ukweli. Kwa hivyo licha ya kuwa kiongozi atakayekuwapo na aliyepo atakuwa labda na hamu na yeye kuona ni vipi anaweza geza mapato yake ama mapato ya wachache kibinafsi, itakuwa anajua moja kwa moja kwamba hawezi kuenda zaidi ya kiwango fulani. Na hiki kiwango, hata kile ambacho tunatarajia kuweka, kwa maono yangu binafsi, ni kwamba tayari hakinufaishi na hakitawezekana. Nilikuwa nikifanya hesabu tu ya haraka haraka kuona kwamba kwa mfano kama tulikuwa na deni ya trilioni 2.1 mwaka wa 2018, hata bila kuomba fedha zingine, kwa sababu ya kuwa sisi tunaomba kwa pesa ya kigeni ambayo ni dola na pesa zingine, na tunatarajia kulipa deni hili kwa pesa hizo hizo, na ili hali uchumi wetu tunategemea zile rasilimali ambazo sio za lazima kwa wale tunaowauzia kwa pesa za kigeni. Kwa utakuta saa hizi bidhaa ambayo inatuletea hela nyingi zaidi ilikuwa ni maua. Maua haya tunayapeleka nchi za ugaibuni. Lakini ujue yule anayenunua maua si lazima anunue maua. Hili ni jambo la kustarehesha. Kwa hivyo wakati wowote akisema wacha nifanye mambo mengine, inamaanisha moja kwa moja hela hii ambayo tulikuwa tunaitarajia hatutaipata. Lakini vile vitu ambavyo sisi tunaagiza kutoka nchi za nje ni vitu vya muhimu. Tunaagiza madawa, tunaagiza mafuta ambayo tunahitaji katika uzalishaji, tunaagiza malighafi. Kwa hivyo sisi tunalazimika kuagiza vitu kwa bei ile ambao wao wanataka, ili hali vitu ambavyo sisi vingeweza kutupatia hela hizi kwao si lazima. Kwa hivyo wakati wowote utakuta kwamba hata tusipoomba pesa zaidi, lakini kwa sababu thamani ya dola inaendelea kupanda, basi moja kwa moja ule ceiling ambao tutakuwa tumeweka, ule mkakati ambao tutakuwa tumeweka kwamba hatuwezi kuzidi hapa, ni lazima tujue kwamba itazidi, kwa sababu deni linalumbikizika, kwa sababu ya kuwa zile pesa ambazo tumeomba nazo za kigeni zinaendelea kupanda na shilingi yetu inazidi kurudi chini. Kuna njia mojawapo ambayo ingetusaidia kwa wale ambao watakuwa nahusika na mambo ya uchumi. Iwapo tungeweza kuimarisha uzalishaji wa vile vitu ambao na sisi tungeweza kupeleka nje. Na kwa bahati mbaya, ijapokuwa tunasema kwamba nchi yetu ni ya ukulima, hata chakula chenyewe saa hizi hatuna cha kutosha. Inamaanisha kile ambacho tunajivunia nacho kwamba uti wa mgongo wa nchi hii ni ukulima, hata chakula chenyewe hatuna. Kwa hivyo mbali na kuleta kutoka nchi za nje vile vitu ambavyo sivyo vya lazima kama chakula, bado inabidi tuweze baadaye kuchukua vitu kama hivi ambavyo tungeweza kuzalisha, na ili hali tungeweza kuzalisha ingeweza kuweka ile thamani ya shilingi yetu kidogo, ikawa inaweza kuwa na kiwango ambacho itapunguza deni ambalo liko nchi za nje. But la muhimu zaidi ambalo linanihuzunisha kwa upande wangu, nikija upande wa Pwani kwanza kwa ujumla, tumezungumzia deni kubwa la SGR. Nafikiri hili ndio deni moja kubwa ambalo lilikuja kwa mpigo. Na tukiangalia deni hili, ijapokuwa sisi kutoka Pwani na tumezungumzia swala hili, hatujakataa SGR, lakini ilichukuliwa deni SGR kumuumiza yule mtu ambaye anatarajiwa kulipa deni hili. Ukiangalia uchumi wa Pwani kwa wakati huu na athari ambazo zimeletwa na SGR, zile biashara ambazo zilikuwako katika upande wa wana biashara wa clearing and forwarding, kutoka upande wa wale waliokuwa na magari ya kubeba ile mizigo, kutoka upande wa wale waliokuwa wana biashara za kuuza malighafi, yani spare parts, utakuta biashara hizo zimekufa. Na ni biashara ambazo zilikuwa zinawasaidia yule mkazi wa Pwani, ilikuwa zimeajiri watu wengi sana. Sasa limechukuliwa, biashara hizo zinaumiza, hazipo, watu wamerudi manyumbani, hawana ajira, na ule mradi ambao umefanywa unatarajiwa pia mtu wa Pwani yule aweze kulipa deni hilo. Pengine itafika wakati ambao tutaonelea, na naona ni vizuri kwamba wakati deni limechukuliwa na linawafaidi watu wengine na wengine hawafaidi kwa deni hilo, basi wale ambao wanafaidika waweze kulipa deni hilo, na wale ambao liliwaumiza deni hilo basi waweze kusamehewa, manake kwanza ndio wameathirika kupitia kuchukua kwa deni hilo. Madeni ambao tumeweza kuchukua, Mheshimiwa Spika, tumesema ni upande wa mabarabara. Mimi katika eneo langu la ubunge, Mheshimiwa Spika, kutoka dunia ianze, tuna kilomita 16 peke yake za barabara ya lami. Na ili hali tumechukua madeni kwa sababu ya barabara. Kuna wakati ambao ilikuwa imewekwa kwamba kila mwaka kutafanywa kilomita 10,000 za lami, lakini kwa upande wetu sisi watu wa Matuga kutoka dunia ianze, na hii kilomita 16 sio ya hivi majuzi, ni kilomita 16 ambazo zilijengwa mwaka wa 85. Kwa hivyo madeni haya ambayo yanachukuliwa yanafaidi wengine sehemu zingine. Kuna watu maalum ambao wanajua deni hili likija litawafaidi wao, lakini kwa upande wetu sisi watu wa Matuga, ikiwa ni barabara, hatujafaidi. Lakini la kusuhudisha ni kwamba bado tutahitajika kulipa madeni haya, na ndio maana nikasema labda itafika wakati kwamba wale ambao madeni yakichukuliwa wakifaidi kwa hayo, basi walipe wao. Sio kwamba wengine wale sisi tuishie kuna wa mikono kisha na sisi tuambiwe pia nyinyi ondokeni, karamu imeisha. Nafikiri hapa kuna tatizo kubwa sana. Na kuomba deni, unaomba na uganga wa deni ni kulipa. Wakati tunaomba, tumetarajia tulipe na nini? Nafikiri hili ndilo swala ambalo kwa hali yoyote litamdhuru kila mwananchi, hata yule ambaye amenufaika na mikopo hii na madeni haya. Ukweli ni kwamba itafika wakati pia yeye atalilia kwenye kivo, kwa sababu vile ambavyo tumeomba mpaka sasa na uchumi wetu vile ambavyo ulivyo, kwamba mashirika yanafungwa, hakuna namna ya watu kupata ajira, moja kwa moja ni kwamba hatutaweza kulipa madeni haya. Na ilifikia wakati kwa kuna tetesi